imagine a factory director, right? Someone who just stepped into this completely failing manufacturing plant.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. And the output is just dropping week over week. The error rate is through the roof. And this new director, they do everything that the traditional, 20th century business playbook tells them to do.
Right, they tighten the screws.
Exactly. They tighten the reporting lines. They install these incredibly strict new key performance indicators, like tracking every single metric, mandating rigorous daily oversight.
And let me guess, the system completely revolts.
Oh, it doesn't just stall. It plummets. Morale completely collapses. And the question is why? Because the problem wasn't the org chart.
Right.
The problem was that the people in the system had entirely outgrown the need for a boss.
It really shatters that comforting illusion we have of mechanical management. We want to believe that if we just pull the right levers or adjust the dials of control, the machine is going to run smoothly.
But humans aren't gears.
Exactly. Treating a hyper-connected human system like a mechanical engine is just a fundamental diagnostic failure. The gears aren't broken. The actual blueprint of the machine itself is completely obsolete.
And that structural collapse is our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring exactly why the traditional top-down authoritarian leadership model, what we're going to call the strongman era, is just falling apart in real time. And of course, what is rising to replace it.
It is a massive shift.
It is. And to do this, we are pulling from a single, highly provocative source today. It's a book called Leadership Is Obsolete, The End of the Strongman Era, written by the Damascus-based Syrian thinker, Bashar Ourabi.
And it is quite a read.
Oh, it is definitely not a polite, sanitized corporate guide. I mean, it reads like a full-on declaration of independence from outdated leadership models. Ourabi comes with mathematical and cultural receipts to argue that the era of the single dictator, whether that's in the corner office or the presidential palace, is just mathematically finished.
Yeah, and I think it is important right here at the top to establish the analytical frame for our discussion today, because Ourabi's text addresses some highly charged topics, specifically regarding authoritarian regimes and historical power structures in the Middle East.
Right, it gets political quickly.
It does, but our goal here is not to endorse any specific political viewpoint or, judge global governance. We are going to impartially examine Ourabi's academic, his psychological, and his structural arguments. We're looking at this purely as a rigorous exploration of systems theory and organizational evolution, exactly as the source material lays it out.
Absolutely. So for you listening, whether you are managing a 5-person startup team, or you're running a massive multinational company, or honestly, you're just trying to understand the sheer institutional chaos of the year 2026, this deep dive is going to equip you with a completely new lens to view authority.
A much needed lens, I'd say.
Totally. And to build that lens, we have to start back at that factory metaphor. Because Ourabi claims the factory director failed for one specific reason. He says the director was trying to manage structure when the actual bottleneck was consciousness.
And we should clarify, consciousness in Ourabi's framework, it's not some mystical New Age term.
Right, no crystals involved here.
No, not at all. He defines it very strictly as psychological independence and moral accountability. He argues that the factory director completely ignored the developmental maturity of the workforce.
So how does he actually measure that maturity?
Well, he builds this premise by integrating frameworks from major organizational psychologists. He pulls heavily from Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because mapping developmental psychology and moral development directly to corporate disengagement, that is a really fascinating leap. How does Kohlberg's theory actually function inside Ourabi's hypothetical factory?
So, Kohlberg theorized that human beings move through very distinct stages of reasoning.
Right.
At the lowest level, which he calls the pre-conventional stage, behavior is driven purely by the desire to avoid punishment.
Like a child not stealing a cookie just because they don't want to get put in timeout?
Exactly. It is fear-based compliance. But as collectives mature into what he calls post-conventional stages, their behavior is guided by an internal, principled conscience.
They actually believe in what they're doing.
Yes, they do the work because they understand the social contract and they see the intrinsic value of the task itself. And Ourabi overlays this with Hersey and Blanchard's situational leadership theory.
Which basically says you have to manage people based on where they are at.
Right. Your leadership style absolutely must adapt to the readiness of your followers.
So if you have a workforce that operates at a post-conventional level, right, these are highly educated, self-directed people who have completely internalized the goals of the project, but you decide to manage them using pre-conventional tools, like rigid oversight, daily check-ins, threats of punishment.
The system will actively reject you.
Wow.
Because you are fundamentally insulting their cognitive and moral capacity. When you apply high, rigid control to a mature, self-directed system, it breeds instant disengagement.
But the reverse is true too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Conversely, if you apply high autonomy to a low maturity system, one that hasn't developed that internal accountability yet, that just breeds pure chaos. The golden rule here is that the leadership style has to match the collective consciousness of the people.
It's like trying to run the latest smartphone operating system on a 15-year-old flip phone.
That is a great way to put it.
I mean, the hardware, the actual maturity and consciousness of the system completely rejects the software of the leadership style. It just crashes. And it functions like a diagnostic dye injected into a sick patient, It reveals that the problem isn't a lack of rules. The boss role itself becomes the toxic element.
What's fascinating here is that Ourabi takes traditional leadership theory, which historically just focuses on how to be a better, more effective boss.
Like how to optimize your micromanagement.
Exactly, and he questions the fundamental premise of it. He forces us to step back and ask if the collective human system has entirely outgrown the necessity of a central commander in the first place.
And if a localized mismatch in psychological maturity already breaks a single factory model, what happens when global internet access exposes those exact same factory workers to a reality where a boss isn't even necessary?
And that brings us to the core of his tech argument.
Right. This is Ourabi's concept of the DAO shock.
Yes, the DAO shock. It is a critical technological catalyst. DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations, they represent a profound shift in organizational physics.
And for you listening, if you aren't super deep into Web3 or crypto, a DAO is an organization that is governed entirely by code instead of human executives. We're talking about smart contracts executing decisions, tokenized voting where the stakeholders directly allocate funds, and just total operational transparency.
There is no CEO.
Exactly. There are 0 humans sitting at the top making arbitrary calls. The rules are baked right into the protocol. And Ourabi points out that employees and citizens today, they aren't just comparing their bad manager to a slightly better manager down the street anymore.
No, their frame of reference is global now.
Right. They are literally watching these decentralized protocols run massive, complex, global entities completely autonomously.
And this creates what Ourabi terms the collapse of distance.
The collapse of distance.
Yeah. Historically, positional authority relied heavily on geographic and informational isolation. Power required a moat, essentially.
You had to be far away and untouchable.
Right. But geography no longer functions as a barrier. The norms of governance are globally visible in real time. An engineer sitting in Damascus today is studying the exact same decentralized governance models, interacting with the exact same DAOs as an engineer sitting in San Francisco.
And there's a specific principle from Ourabi here that I think anchors his entire argument. He writes, expectation reshapes tolerance, and tolerance reshapes power.
That is the crux of it. Because when people witness a system operating fairly efficiently and transparently without a dictator or some micromanaging CEO, their baseline expectation of what is structurally possible fundamentally shifts.
They see that a better way actually exists.
Yes. And once that expectation shifts, their tolerance for arbitrary top-down control just evaporates. The traditional power structure loses its psychological foundation simply because the governed no longer believe the hierarchy is a natural law. They realize it's a choice.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. And I have to push back a bit here on behalf of the listener because I can hear people thinking this right now.
Go for it.
Looking at a DAO on a computer screen is a digital experience, right? It's virtual. Can a digital protocol actually dismantle physical, real-world, positional authority? Like, a smart contract doesn't own the physical office building. A tokenized voting system cannot stop a tank rolling down the street. Can code really threaten a physical strongman?
That's the intuitive counterargument, right. But Ourabi says evaluating power through the lens of a tank is a purely 20th century metric.
Oh, really?
Yes. He argues that the physical threat is neutralized by the physics of the networked age. These digital native generations, they are not necessarily organizing violent physical rebellions in the classical barricade in the street sense.
Because they don't have to.
Exactly. Their psychology is calibrated entirely to protocol logic.
Meaning they expect the real world to function like an open source computer program.
They demand traceability and visibility. In a protocol, the rules are transparent, they are embedded in the system, and crucially, they are applied equally to all participants before any action is executed.
There are no backroom deals.
None. So, digital natives expect the rules of their physical governance to be proven and verifiable before they will accept the exercise of authority. When a physical leader demands obedience simply based on their positional title, it registers to a network mind as a critical system error.
It just doesn't compute. So it isn't a violent overthrow then. It's an obsolescence protocol. They don't fight the tank. They literally just route around it.
That is exactly it. The authority becomes entirely dysfunctional through economic and intellectual starvation. The network generation simply takes their capital, their talent, and their cooperation, and they move it into parallel, decentralized structures.
Leaving the old boss with nothing.
Exactly. The hierarchy is left physically intact, the building is still there, but it's completely hollowed out. It's governing a system that no longer produces any actual value.
Wow. And this global technological DAO shock is currently colliding head-on with the world's oldest traditional power structures. And this is where the deep dive moves to Ourabi's specific focus on the Middle East in the year 2026.
Yes, the historical collision.
We were watching ancient history meet modern tech in this massive systemic crash.
And Ourabi provides some deeply layered historical context here. He argues that the entire historical tapestry of the region was engineered on an equation of power plus distance.
Going way back.
Way back. He traces this back to ancient Mesopotamia, looking at Hammurabi, the Babylonian king. Hammurabi is famously depicted on a stele, receiving the law codes directly from Shamash, the sun god.
Right. I remember seeing pictures of that in history class.
Right. The authority was divine, it was distant, and critically, it was insulated from public scrutiny.
Because if the citizens actually see the king make a mistake, or if they realize he is just a flawed, regular human being, the entire divine illusion breaks. Information asymmetry was the ultimate shield.
Precisely. And Ourabi tracks this exact mechanism through the historical caliphates, through the sultans, all the way up to the oil-era strongmen of the 20th century. The system only functioned because the leader was elevated and totally insulated from the masses. But the collapse of distance means that insulation is permanently destroyed. Every flaw, every arbitrary decision is now broadcast globally in high definition.
Which makes the strongman model actively suicidal in the current era. And Ourabi points to right now, 2026, as the perfect storm for this collapse. I mean, we have this intense convergence of post-pandemic economic realities, the absolute omnipresence of artificial intelligence, mainstream blockchain technology, and on top of all of that, an unprecedented demographic youth bulge.
Right, millions of young people.
Millions of highly connected, digitally fluent young people who are entering these ancient, rigid structures.
And that demographic reality creates what Ourabi calls the dual reality mismatch.
The day versus night friction.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it if you're listening. You have citizens who are forced to live in rigid, antiquated hierarchies by day. They go to a corporate office or a government ministry where unquestioning obedience to a single boss is demanded. But then by night, they exist in a decentralized digital truth.
Two totally different worlds.
Completely. By night, they are trading assets, they are communicating securely, and they are organizing globally without borders or central controllers. And Ourabi argues that this extreme, jarring mismatch between the daytime physical reality and the nighttime digital reality is the root cause of all current institutional instability.
Because the psychological dissonance of living in two opposing operational realities is just unsustainable. You cannot expect a population conditioned to interact with global, transparent networks to just revert to a pre-conventional, fear-based compliance level in their physical governance.
They've seen behind the curtain.
Right. The human mind cannot compartmentalize trust that way indefinitely. The digital expectation eventually bleeds into the physical reality.
Okay, so does Ourabi suggest that regions with deep ancient traditions just need to, copy-paste Silicon Valley tech bro culture and throw out thousands of years of history? Because trying to run a modern city's traffic grid with a single stop sign seems like a recipe for a different kind of disaster.
This raises an important question, and honestly, it is where Ourabi avoids the classic trap of Western technological utopianism.
He doesn't just say, make it all a startup.
No. Importing Silicon Valley verbatim would fail spectacularly because it completely lacks cultural resonance in the region. Instead, Ourabi roots his blueprint for the future in the region's own historical DNA. He reaches past the recent history of the 20th century strongmen to much deeper, much older principles of decentralized trust.
Yeah, I was actually fascinated by how he used the Persian satrapies to prove this point.
It's a great historical parallel.
It really is. Instead of a rigid top-down empire where the emperor micromanaged every single province, the ancient satrapies functioned as highly decentralized local governments. They had extreme autonomy to manage their own cultural and economic affairs as long as they contributed to the unified framework of the empire. It was basically an ancient protocol for decentralized trust, and it worked incredibly well.
Exactly. And Ourabi pairs that administrative model with the Islamic concept of shura, or consultation, which was practiced by the Prophet. In its original context, shura was a highly decentralized and consensus-driven approach to leadership. It demanded that decisions be made collectively by the people who were actually affected by them.
Not just a guy barking orders from a throne.
Right. He also highlights the ancient philosophical belief that true legitimacy derives from maintaining cosmic order and justice, not from just wielding brute force.
Yeah, so he completely reframes the narrative here.
Yeah,
The authoritarian strongman wasn't the final destination of these cultures. It was just a developmental stage.
a very long stage, but just a stage.
Yeah. It was a stage that made sense when information was scarce and physical distance was vast. But the region, and frankly the entire global corporate landscape as well, has simply outgrown that stage.
But diagnosing the fatal flaws of a system is only half the work.
Right. Ourabi dedicates part 4 of his book to a highly actionable framework. He moves from theoretical diagnosis to what leaders must actually do to survive this shift. He outlines the literal transition from bureaucracy to blockchain.
The blueprint.
Yes.
Ourabi proposes a specific hybrid model for the future of leadership. Because he isn't advocating for pure structuralist anarchy where nothing gets done, his model synthesizes 4 key pillars: the transformational imperative, adaptive leadership, highly ethical governance, and rigorous succession planning.
All crucial elements.
But the linchpin of this entire section is his golden rule for the new model. He states, hierarchy still organizes work, but protocols organize trust.
And we really need to make that distinction incredibly concrete for people. Organizational structure does not vanish.
You still need someone to make sure the trains run on time. Exactly. A complex entity still requires project managers. It still requires individuals to coordinate physical logistics, like managing a global supply chain. Hierarchy remains a very efficient mechanism to organize tasks.
Doubt.
However, in the 20th century, we also relied on the hierarchy to establish trust. You trusted the corporate system because you feared the CEO, or you trusted the national brand because of the charismatic visionary founder. The trust was inextricably tied to a single human being's positional title.
Which is incredibly fragile.
Well, fragile.
Because humans are flawed.
Exactly.
But Ourabi says in the networked age, trust can no longer be tied to a fallible human bottleneck.
Protocols must handle the trust layer now. Transparent rules, verifiable data on a blockchain, decentralized consensus mechanisms, these do not require human interpretation or mood swings. When a protocol organizes the trust, ensuring that funds are allocated fairly or that votes are counted completely transparently,
then the human leader is actually freed from the burden of micromanagement and coercion. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If you are a manager, a director, or a CEO, your identity has to fundamentally change. You are no longer the controller of people. You are, in Ourabi's words, the architect of coherence.
The architect of coherence. I love that term.
It's brilliant. Yeah. You aren't the one pointing the sword and demanding compliance anymore. You are the one building the stage so that the decentralized network can perform safely and effectively. You are designing the environment where the collective maturity of your team can actually flourish.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Ourabi has basically provided a mathematically and psychologically calibrated survival architecture for both nations and corporations. It is a highly pragmatic blueprint. He demonstrates that clinging to 20th century authoritarianism, whether that's in a government ministry or just a corporate boardroom, is structurally impossible now.
It's fighting the tide with a spoon.
Absolutely. The network has already routed around the positional leader, so you either evolve into an architect of coherence or you just become obsolete.
It is a profound shift in how we understand human coordination. Whether you are running a country or managing a small creative team, or honestly just navigating your own career trajectory in this hyper-connected economy, Ourabi's text forces you to really look in the mirror. Are you constantly trying to manage structure, tweaking the KPIs, tightening the reporting rules when you should be nurturing the consciousness and maturity of your team?
Right. Are you treating them like children or adults?
Exactly. Are you still relying on your positional title when your people are desperately craving protocol-level trust and transparency?
It is arguably the defining leadership challenge of our decade. And while Ourabi maps out this incredible transition to the architect of coherence, there is a lingering thread that I think warrants deep reflection on your own time.
Oh, lay it on us.
Well, Ourabi says that in the near future, hierarchy organizes work while protocols organize trust, and the human leader serves as the architect of that coherence. But as AI continues to evolve at an exponential rate, what happens when artificial intelligence starts both doing the work and writing the protocols? In that world, will human systems even need an architect of coherence? Or will the network eventually just design itself?
That is a staggering thought to leave on. If the machine eventually designs its own optimal gears and writes its own trust protocols, the definition of human leadership might just disappear entirely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Leadership is Obsolete. As you go back to your day, look at the systems around you and ask yourself, are you ready for Leadership 2.0? Or are you still clinging to an obsolete throne? We'll see you next time.